Welcome, friends, to another edition of Wolff Responds. I call this one Taxing Our Way to Inequality. I want to start by briefly discussing two recent announcements by Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. The first one had to do with the fact that the total indebtedness of the United States, the amount of money borrowed by and owed by the United States government, that amount crossed $40 trillion over the last week. Extraordinary. Over the last 10 years, that amount of money doubled. In other words, 10 years ago, the total debt of the United States was $20 trillion. It took us 240 years as an independent country to work up $20 trillion of debt. But it only took 10 more years, from 2016 to now, to add another 20, to double from 20 to $40 trillion. I want to talk with you about the meaning of that debt. The other announcement Scott Bessent presented to us was a statement about the taxes coming over the next year. The Treasury Department is responsible for those taxes, and we're beginning to get releases from the Treasury Department about the taxes that are going to have to be raised over the next fiscal year from October of this year to October of 2027. And I want to put these two together to show you the absolutely stunning worsening of inequality that those numbers represent. So let me start with the taxes this year and next year. I'm not going to go through all of them. It would take too long. I'm going to focus on one very important amount. During the first 6 months of President Trump's current presidency, he used his control of the Republican Party of both houses of Congress to pass what he called the Big, Beautiful Tax Bill. That tax bill gave tax cuts to corporations and the rich, not only to them, but mostly to them, as you'll see in a moment. And the Congressional Budget Office calculated that that bill will cost the government of the United States $4 trillion, just that one law, in lost revenue, money it's not going to get because the taxes were cut, as I say, mostly on corporations and the rich. Further research, also by the Congressional Budget Office, shows that about 1/4 of that tax cut, 25% of it, will go to the 1% richest Americans. Let me do that again. 1/4 of the $4 trillion saved in taxes that the government won't get will in fact benefit 1% of the American people. Okay, if you save the economy $4 trillion, but $1 trillion goes just to the top 1%, you are making them, the 1%, much richer than the other 99%. 1% gets 1/4 of the tax saving, and the other 99% share the other 3/4. In other words, that tax bill dramatically worsens the inequality of the United States, which is already greater than that of most other industrial developed economies in the world. We don't just have serious inequality built up now over the decades and creating, on the one hand, the billionaires whose names and pictures we see in the newspaper and on TV every day, and the economic difficulties millions and millions of American families are experiencing more and more with the passage of time. You know, the rising gas prices you complain about, the rising food prices you complain about, the rising rentals we all face. We, the mass of people, are being squeezed left and right. But the people at the top are floating in money. Let's remember a couple of months ago when we were told that it was our duty to celebrate the remarkable event of the world's first trillionaire, Elon Musk. And I remember saying to all of you, what an amazingly disgusting fact about capitalism, that in this day and age, when so many millions are needy, this system adds wealth, hundreds of billions of dollars in wealth, and then gives it to the man who's already the richest person on earth, instead of using it to improve the lives of millions. What kind of a system? Well, now I want to explain to you how it is that taxes have become such an important engine of inequality, making inequality worse. Here's how it goes. In our strange American political system, politicians are under the gun. What do I mean? They have a pressure that leads them to do something which makes our unequal economy even more unequal. The problem of our politicians can be summed up this way. They dare not impose taxes on corporations and the rich. And you all know why. Because most of the money that most of the candidates need to raise to pay for their expensive campaigns, millions for TV, millions for social media, and so on, they dare not offend corporations or the rich, because those are where the big bucks come. Mr. Trump is president in no small part because Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, contributed over $200 million to Mr. Trump's campaign. So the politician dare not tax corporations and the rich. And by now, politicians dare not tax the mass of people much more than they already have. Why? Because the people are angry and bitter and resentful. They know they're being taxed way beyond what they should have been. They know that the rich are not paying, so it's them that have to make up the difference. And politicians are afraid if they pass tax increases, the mass of people will vote against them. It has happened many times. So the politicians are stuck. They dare not tax corporations and the rich because it would hurt their donations. And they dare not tax the mass of people much more because it would hurt their votes. and they need the donations, and they need the votes. So what do the politicians do? Because they're called upon by corporations and the rich and by the mass of people to provide all kinds of services. The government maintains 700 military bases around the world. Oh yeah, they say it's for national security. We're not threatened by 700 countries. We're not threatened by anything like that. That's to make sure everybody deals with our businesses the way our businesses want it. It's protection racket for American activities abroad. They also want the government to educate all their workers so they don't have to spend money doing that. The government teaches us to read and write, so the employer doesn't have to. Before we had public schools, the employer had to pay for that. On and on and on. The government has to take care of people, and the government has to take care of the corporations. But it dares not tax neither the one nor the other. How are you going to do that? What's the magic? Here it comes, folks. Here comes how the tax system makes us so unequal. The politicians solve the problem. They can raise the money to pay for what the corporations want, and they can raise the money to pay for what the mass of people want without taxing them. How can they do it? By borrowing the money. Aha! Now you're getting the clue, right? That's why we're the country more in debt than any other on this planet. That's why we are in debt $40 trillion. Because that's our political system works that way. But it's better than that, folks. Here we go. When the government doesn't tax corporations and the rich, who have more money now than they ever have, we are already a highly unequal society. We are the country that will have the first trillionaire. The money is there. It's all in a few hands. It's all in the Zuckerbergs and the Bezoses and the Bill Gateses and all of them. You know them because when President Trump was inaugurated in January of 2025, he had them sitting behind him in a semicircle just so everyone would see who his closest buddies were. So now we have it all. The government doesn't tax corporations and the rich, leaving them with billions and billions of dollars they don't have to pay in taxes. But of course, since they don't, the government doesn't have the money to do for the companies and for all of us what we all demand. So the government borrows the money. But who can it borrow from? Have you ever lent money to the United States government? Of course not. The vast majority never have. A few of you have bought some U.S. government savings bonds, but that's a tiny part of what we're talking about. The big loans are made in millions and millions of dollars, and they're made by corporations and the rich. Now you get it. When the government doesn't tax corporations and the rich, it leaves them with the money so that the government can then go to them and say, since we didn't tax you, we don't have enough. Would you be so kind as to lend the government the money that you didn't pay in taxes? Oh, sure, say the corporations and the rich. They may not be smart. They may not be the sharpest knives in the drawer, but they know that rather than paying a tax, And when you do that, bye-bye your money. Rather than that, they'd much rather lend that money to the government, receive interest payments every year for a few years, and then the government gives it all back to them. Wow. Is that a cost to the government? Of course it is. The government has to pay interest. Like anybody who borrows money, there's an interest payment you have to make. So the government pays interest to corporations and the rich who lend them the money. And where does the government get the money to pay the interest? From you and me. Our taxes go to the government, which uses it to pay interest to corporations and the rich because they didn't pay the taxes. And that's why they are becoming ever richer and you aren't. The tax system makes our inequality worse. If the government had taxed corporations and the rich, it would have gotten that money without having to pay interest. It could have done everything it did with the borrowed money without having to pay interest. We would have fewer taxes to pay because the government wouldn't have to pay interest with those taxes. We're screwed by this tax system. And the rich people are laughing all the way to the bank which they own. Think about it, friends. When Bernie Sanders said the economy is rigged, he wasn't telling us half of all that's going on. We all appreciated Bernie for saying it. And one of the ways I appreciate him is to take it further and to show you that Bernie was more correct than even he perhaps understood at the time. If interventions like this strike you as useful, please share this video with others, your friends, your family, your co-workers. That's why we make them. And of course, if you can help us defray the cost of producing and distributing these videos, please go to our website, democracyatwork.info, and contribute whatever you can. Thank you.